Welcome back, Year 5. Today we are moving on to Chapter 16 of Fantastic Mr. Fox. Remember on Monday we were evaluating characters, so we looked at what they did, what they said, some of their character traits, and it helped us form an overall idea of these characters. Today we're going to zoom in a little bit closer. We're going to evaluate a character's choices, the things they do. We're going to discuss what he or she could have done differently and how it would affect the story. This is so important because the choices a character makes are what drive the story forward. Let's look at an example of that. So this question is going to have us evaluate a choice that Mr. Fox made. We have to go back in our minds to chapter 3. In that chapter, it was when Mr. Fox was sneaking out of the hole. He was going to go back and steal from the farms, and that's when he got shot. Here's the question. In chapter 3, the shooting, what might have happened if Mr. Fox had listened to Mrs. Fox before leaving the hole? Unfortunately, you don't have a copy of the book to look at, but I want you to think back. Remember, just before Mr. Fox was going to leave the hole to go steal a chicken for Mrs. Fox, she said to him, "Be careful." And he was like, it's no big deal. I know what I'm doing. Those guys are idiots. And he didn't really listen to her. Now, this is what I wrote. I evaluated Mr. Fox's character, and I determined what might have happened differently if he had listened to Mrs. Fox. In chapter 3, Mr. Fox was being very confident because he felt he was so much smarter than the farmers. When Mrs. Fox warned him to be careful, he ignored her concern, saying that he could smell the farmers a mile away. If he had listened to her and been more careful, he probably would have looked around more carefully before leaving the hole, and his tail wouldn't have been shot off. So to come up with this response, I had to think to myself, what happened because of the choices Mr. Fox made? And I was able to realize, well, because he was being overly confident, he wasn't careful enough when he left the hole, and that is why the farmers were able to shoot him. I probably could have taken this answer a step further and said it wouldn't have made the farmers want to kill him so badly. Because when he snuck out and they only got his tail, remember, that's when they got so mad and they're like, you know what? He's not going to get away. We're going to get him for real. And then they started digging up an entire hill and things got crazy from there. So maybe if he had just listened to Mrs. Fox, the story wouldn't have happened as it did. Maybe he would have snuck out a different way, or he would have been more careful, and things just would have carried on as normal. So what's important for today's intention is that you take some time to think about the character and the choices that they made and how things could have gone differently. Now let's start chapter 16. We left off where they had broken into Bean's secret cider cellar and they met a really weird rat that seemed to be drunk. And then they heard a woman starting to come down the stairs. Chapter 16. The Woman. "Quick," said Mr. Fox, "hide!" He and Badger and the smallest fox jumped up onto a shelf and crouched behind a row of big cider jars. Peering around the jars, they saw a huge woman coming down into the cellar. At the foot of the steps, the woman paused, looking to the right and left. Then she turned and headed straight for the place where Mr. Fox and Badger and the smallest fox were hiding. She stopped right in front of them. The only thing between her and them was a row of cider jars. She was so close, Mr. Fox could hear the sound of her breathing. Peeping through the crack between two bottles, he noticed that she carried a big rolling pin in one hand. "How many will he want this time, Mrs. Bean?" the woman shouted. And from the top of the steps, the other voice called back, "Bring up 2 or 3 jars." "He drank 4 yesterday, Mrs. Bean." "Yes, but he won't want that many today because he's not going to be up there more than a few hours longer. He says the fox is bound to make a run for it this morning. Can't possibly stay down that hole another day without food." The woman in the cellar reached out and lifted a jar of cider from the shelf. The jar she took was next but one to the jar behind which Mr. Fox was crouching. "I'll be glad when the rotten brute is killed and strung up on the front porch," she called out. "And by the way, Mrs. Bean, your husband promised I could have the tail as a souvenir." "The tail's been all shot to pieces," said the voice from upstairs. "Didn't you know that?" "You mean it's ruined?" "Of course it's ruined. They shot the tail but missed the fox." "Oh, heck," said the big woman. I did so want that tail. You can have the head instead, Mabel. You can get it stuffed and hang it on your bedroom wall. Hurry up now with that cider. Yes, ma'am, I'm coming, said the big woman, and she took a second jar from the shelf. If she takes one more, she'll see us, thought Mr. Fox. He could feel the smallest fox's body pressed tightly against his own, quivering with excitement. Will 2 be enough, Mrs. Bean, or shall I take 3? My goodness, Mabel, I don't care so long as you get a move on. Then 2 it is, said the huge woman, speaking to herself now. He drinks too much anyway. Carrying a jar in each hand, and with the rolling pin tucked under one arm, she walked away across the cellar. At the foot of the steps she paused and looked around, sniffing the air. There's rats down here again, Mrs. Bean. I can smell 'em. Then poison them, woman, poison them. You know where the poison's kept. Yes, ma'am, Mabel said. She climbed slowly out of sight up the steps. The door slammed. Quick, said Mr. Fox. Grab a jar each and run for it. Rat stood on his high shelf and shrieked, What did I tell you? You nearly got nabbed, didn't you? You nearly gave the game away. You keep out of here from now on. I don't want you around. This is my place. You, said Mr. Fox, are going to be poisoned. Poppycock, said Rat. I sit up here and watch her putting the stuff down. She'll never get me. Mr. Fox and Badger and the smallest fox ran across the cellar, clutching a gallon jar each. Goodbye, Rat, they called out as they disappeared through the hole in the wall. Thanks for the lovely cider. Thieves, shrieked Rat. Robbers, bandits, burglars. And there we have it, the end of chapter 16. We only have 2 chapters left, and we're going to look at them on Thursday because there's no class on Friday. As always, I want you to write your prediction below. What do you think is going to happen next time we read? Now let's move on to evaluating some characters' choices. All right, here's your independent work. Questions 1A and 1B are related, and questions 2A and 2B are related. 1A says, in chapter 16, the woman, why did Mabel only take 2 jars of cider? 1B, what might have happened if she had taken more cider? 2A, why do you think Mr. Fox stayed very quiet when Mabel and Mrs. Bean were talking about his tail? And finally, 2B, what might have happened if Mr. Fox got upset when he heard them speaking about his tail? I want you to copy down each question and write your answer below. At a minimum, I would expect 1 complete sentence for each answer. For the B parts, I would actually expect a little bit more, because this is where you're going into thinking about what might have happened, so you could be a bit more detailed. Make sure your book is neat, and please check your spellings. I've noticed some misspellings throughout work recently, so double check, make sure you're using the correct spelling, especially for names. When you're done, take a picture, send it to me, and as always, stay safe and I'll see you soon.